This minimalist wants more. Today on the Enough-ism Podcast, I'm joined by Soha Al-Jurf, a voice specialist and depth psychologist, to explore the power of visualization for healing and self-discovery. Stay tuned until the end for a special guided visualization with Soha to connect with your sacred inner sanctuary.
My name is Soha Al-Jurf. I'm the founder of Voice Coaching for Creatives. My work combines my expertise in voice with my knowledge of Jungian psychology to help women find their voices and heal their minds through one-on-one coaching and online and in-person workshops.
I know that you are an expert in the power of visualization. And one of the key reasons I wanted to speak about this with you today is we are so turned on, tapped in essentially to the media, to just constant stimulation. And what fascinates me about the power of visualization is it empowers you to go inward and to find stillness and to kind of leverage your imagination and what you see with your inner eye to bring peace. Visualizing, tell me about why it is powerful for people to practice. What is the purpose around it?
A lot of people are looking for something, a practice or a tool to help them calm the nervous system. Oftentimes they're told to sit and meditate, but for different personalities, different things work. And for some personalities, sitting still is like a hell realm for them. And so they find it really, really difficult to do. So for some people, sitting meditation works. For other people, walking meditation works. For some people, guided meditation works. And so for a lot of people, if people have a really great visual imagination, which not everybody does, but if people have a really great visual imagination, sometimes visualizations are really the key for them.
Talk about how you tap into that aspect of yourself. So, kind of combining that sense of stillness and then that sense of tapping into your imagination and kind of that flow state when you are practicing visualization.
Well, some people do it from dream work. Some people will either write down their dream work in journals, or they at least remember their dream work, or they're fascinated by their dream work. And some people, they can drop into visualizations through what some people describe as a shamanic journey. So they'll either just sit and imagine dropping in and dropping in and dropping into their bodies and going deeper and deeper and deeper in quiet, or to the sound of a drum or a rattle or even music. And they'll just sort of will themselves to drop into sort of like their dream world, but when they're in a conscious awake state. So some people will do it that way, in terms of doing their own guided visualizations within themselves, and they can use their imagination to do that. Some people, their imagination is not as spontaneously vivid as others, so they need somebody else to guide them through. So that's where guided visualization comes in. And I do a lot of that with my students and my clients. And when I was working clinically, I did it a lot with my patients, just as a way to not only calm the nervous system and to relax and get into the breath and understand their own sense of relaxation, but also to go inward, to understand the self better. And in things like shamanic visualization, where you're kind of going on a journey within your own imagination, the idea is to delve into something other than ordinary reality. And whether you think of that as the dream world or another, some people think of it as an actual spiritual world that they're visiting. Some people perceive it as a place that they go to. But shamans, for example, historically used active visualization in order to travel, to figure out where food was, where medicine was, and they couldn't travel physically to go search across their entire landscape. So they used their imaginations to travel. And whether you think of that as a literal, your soul exiting the body and flying around, or just delving into the depths of your imagination or your subconscious or unconscious mind, like we do when we dream, that's up for people's interpretation and their own spiritual kind of perspectives. But there are a million ways people can use visualization, and it's super powerful in the sense that it really delves into the rest of the psyche, often the unconscious psyche that we're not using in our conscious daily lives.
Take me through the practice of, so you mentioned visualizing to a sound, like a rattle, for example.
Mhm.
If you would like, take me through the process of visualizing a rattle? So is it obviously the sound? Is it like what that rattle represents? Is it like the fact that this is a sound that has been used for, many, many generations prior, something that is created by hand by our ancestors? Like, does it depend on like who you are and what kind of focal point you let your brain relax into it? Because I can imagine depending on like how creative you are and how patient you are, it being either like a very frustrating kind of like a linear process or like kind of like relaxing into it. How would you recommend someone doing that if you were to start with like a simple visualization?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it really depends on the person and the people that I work with or, do visualizations with, or that I've been with in, say, ceremonial space or spaces where we're using a drum or a rattle. The point is to get out of ordinary reality. And some people will use plant medicines to get out of ordinary reality. And by ordinary reality, we really just mean the conscious mind and the habituated mind. So all we're trying to do is break up the mind's patterns. That can be done in millions of ways. And so, generally speaking, the mind is by design very structured, very habituated, very repetitive. From the day we're born, the conscious mind or the egoic mind is trying to figure out how to be a person. And so the egoic mind responds to its surroundings and sees how the culture that it's born into is doing things, and then to a large degree just repeats them and tries to be like everybody else, tries to do what the other people do. But most of us who've gone through our teen years, at least, and the terrible twos, know that there's a core essence of us that really is not into what the rest of the population's doing. A lot of that stuff gets shoved into the unconscious. So now we have this way of being in the conscious world and then this way of being in the unconscious that's pushed underground. But it doesn't go away, it's just pushed underground. So many of us were creatives who were raised in families of athletes. And so we were forced to play baseball, but really we wanted to play a violin. Those things go underground, but they're still there. When we introduce a drum or a rattle, yeah, it's absolutely possible that is some sort of unconscious or collective unconscious repressed or suppressed memory that all of us contain. Jung thought that we all have this kind of collective unconscious that we all share. And it's possible that from our cave days and days sitting around the fire in the deserts that we would drum, that it was one of the first instruments, if not the first instrument that was created, and there would be drumming. And so people would go into these trance-like states. It's possible that works because it reaches a part of our brain that is very ancestral and is used to sitting around after the sun goes down and listening to one of the members of our tribe or extended community playing a drum. And some people think that it has to do with neurological frequencies and kind of slowing those down by forcing the ears to listen to a slower or particular beat outside of alpha, sort of into a more relaxed beta state. But generally speaking, almost anything we do that's repetitive can get us into a meditative state. Those of us who type and type frequently and relatively quickly sometimes notice that typing even can get us into a meditative state or a state, almost an altered state of consciousness. Walking can get you into an altered state of consciousness, just if you're maintaining a consistent rhythm. Anything that maintains a consistent rhythm, anything that breaks you from the normal patterns of thinking can help you drop down out of that conscious egoic mind and into the unconscious, whether collective or individual.
Yes, because I would imagine if you're chanting the same phrase over and over, or like you mentioned, I imagine sitting in the woods, you're in nature and the drum is beating and it gives you something to focus on essentially that's rhythmic and expected. So then you're able to kind of like relax into an altered state.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Talk to me about when you enter into a visualization. So you mentioned before you're kind of in the ordinary, in the habitual, right? In the earthly realm, essentially.
Mhm.
Talk to me about what happens when you start to kind of flip that switch and you start to enter into a visualization and kind of start to lose yourself into that. what happens in terms of like the broader implications.
Well, a lot of people, when they are either using a drum themselves or listening to a drum, and that can be different for different people also. Some people kind of visualize better when they're drumming for themselves, and other people visualize better when somebody else is drumming for them and they're just sitting or lying still. But basically, what happens for most people is the mind kind of, the conscious egoic mind kind of fuzzes out a little bit. Thoughts slow down or pretty much end or stop. Some people describe an almost floating sensation, that they feel a little bit ungrounded or detached from the world. And then again, depending on one's capacity for seeing images or visualizing images, people will start to see in the back of in their minds, on the back of their eyeballs, or however you want to look at it. I don't know exactly where we see it, but people will start to see images just like they will in a dreamscape. And again, how vivid those are varies from person to person. Some people will feel like they are literally walking around in another city, state, country, world, realm, and they can feel things and touch things just as they would with their senses in this realm, or very close to it anyway. And for some people, their images are very, very vivid. For other people, they're much more foggy or blurry, or they're less concrete. Some people visualize entire scenes, like from a movie or a dreamscape. Some people will see an entire story unfold in front of them. A lot of people, when they are going into that kind of a drumming visualization, it seems that they are tapping into the collective unconscious, because they'll often see historical figures that they didn't even necessarily know or hadn't studied about. They'll see figures in there from antiquity. A lot of people will see common figures like Nefertiti or Zeus or other gods and goddesses that aren't necessarily in their daily conscious world, and they're like, who is that? And so they'll go in there and be able to talk to them, and sometimes they'll give them a name, and they'll come out of their trance-like state and they'll say, oh, I've met this person. And then they'll go Google it and find out that that's a historic figure or a mythological figure that they didn't know before. It really does vary, and for some people, they'll just see a single beam of light and think it's nothing. But then when asked about it, or somebody like me or somebody else who's guiding that process goes through the process with them and discusses it with them, oftentimes a single beam of light can be extremely symbolic and meaningful. So with any kind of visualization, we're generally speaking, we're looking for, if you're doing guided visualization for this purpose, to gain information or to understand the self better, which is a little different from just doing it for meditative purposes or relaxation purposes. In one, if you're kind of doing your own journey, you're going in to figure something out. With relaxation or visualization, in other words, when I do a visualization with someone, either I, as the practitioner, am trying to find out information from their unconscious, and so I'm guiding them on a journey to see what I can interpret. Or if it's simply for relaxation, it really is just the same thing as meditation, but it helps them to have a story or somebody else talking to them to focus their conscious mind on, so that their own mind doesn't wander. But either way, we're trying to delve into something that goes past or beyond the conscious mind.
Yeah, that's beautifully explained. And as someone myself who is able to, I guess, achieve deep states of meditation, the best way I can describe it, and I've explained this to like other meditation teachers, is it feels like my eyes are closed, but they're also wide open. When you do experience visualizations, especially ones that are powerful, like one thing that I've talked about with meditation teachers is paying attention to the emotion that you feel in that moment, because sometimes, for example, you may see things we don't understand.
I think that as human beings, it's natural for us to search for meaning. Nobody knows how we got here or why we're here. I mean, we know literally how we got here, but it's being a human is so bizarre. And in some ways, it's often so painful and destructive and confusing. And so I think the search for meaning is our sort of core essential, it's core to our essential essence as being human beings. There's definitely the sort of search for what does it mean, but also I think that it is curious to know, okay, well, if you have a visualization of a city and then you later see it on a coaster or a napkin, or you go there and you think, oh my gosh, I've been here before. Does it imply something about past lives? Jung suggested that it implied something about a collective unconscious. So he thought that all of these experiences get programmed into our DNA, and then that is like a blueprint that we pass on from generation to generation to generation. So whether I, in a past life, whether my soul saw a Nefertiti or just some other member of the human race saw a Nefertiti, and that memory is still etched into the DNA of my brain somehow, I think it's all in there. And I have lots and lots of experiences where similarly I'll see something in a vision, something I've never seen before or heard of before, and then a week or a month later, or a year later, or years later sometimes, I realize, oh, this is the thing I saw in my vision. And whether that means we're clairvoyant or have special skills, I don't know, but I think it's pretty common to the human psyche if you're paying attention. Not everyone pays attention or cares, but I think it is available to most of us if we're paying attention, or those of us who want to pay attention. And whether it's indicative of a past life, or it's the collective unconscious, or it's just a coincidence, I think it's as meaningful as you want or make it to be.
That's interesting. And you mentioned before, like even seeing a beam of white light, that can be incredibly powerful.
It could be a whole being. I mean, you just don't know. If other realms exist, if there are spiritual realms and they're
Yeah.
real, then it could be an actual being coming to give you information or comfort you, or at least even just help you. If, let's say, you're going into the meditation or the visualization with doubt about whether there's a spiritual world, and then this beam of light shows up, and you're just absolutely convinced that, well, that was an angelic being. Maybe they're just coming to visit you. Maybe they're just coming to assure you that they really exist. Or maybe your psyche is assuring you that in your psyche there is something spiritual that is going to take care of you.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Feeling just connected to everything that is, and then if and when you do experience something, feeling that sense of connection, because it's such a personal experience.
Agreed. Anything that helps us make sense of our lives and feel that we belong and that something makes sense, I think most of us are looking for. I think most of us are looking for some sense that something makes sense, because
A
so
sense of purpose, a
a
sense
sense of
of
purpose.
connection.
Exactly. A
Yeah,
sense of
yeah, yeah.
belonging, a sense that it's not all for naught and nonsensical, but that there's some greater pattern or some greater plan, whether that is created by a god or just that somehow the universe makes sense, scientifically or otherwise, I think is comforting to people.
And it's through the visualization essentially as shapes and symbols and things that you recognize with your senses through the state of meditation that kind of connects you to yourself and to other realms and whatever it is to your sense of purpose and being.
Absolutely. And just like the dream world, you might see things that are familiar, but how your psyche is making sense of them may not be known to you. So that's why it helps to have practitioners or coaches or therapists or whatever who work in dream work or visualization, who can say, you know what, I've studied this, or I've studied somebody who studied this. And these symbols are meant to be, they're almost like a different language that the psyche speaks in. The psyche speaks not in coded language, but in a language. And so the language of images, at least in Jungian thought, is thought to be its own language that you have to learn, just like you'd learn English or Spanish or any other language.
Everything that you said so far, it really paints it in such a beautiful way in terms of just the simplicity of everything, but then also the complexity. If you want to maybe talk about the importance of visualization.
Yeah. So from my vantage point with the voice, I use visualization in two different ways. Well, more than two, but two primary ways. One is in actually visualizing the system of voice production. So I will ask people to imagine that, for example, they're standing on the back of their tongue, looking straight down. What do they see? And believe it or not, everyone from big man construction workers who've never meditated a day in their lives and are just very much connected to the day-to-day world, to everyone I've ever worked with, will get some unusual, unexpected image. Now, obviously, some people will start out and they'll say, well, I see my tonsils and I see my uvula and I see the back of my throat, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'll have them do is I'll go on a journey down their throat with them. And I'll have them take a flashlight. And some people are very resistant to this, including myself. When I first started doing it, I had a very, very
Right.
concrete thinking mind. I was like, this is dumb. I don't get it. It took me honestly years to get to a point where it didn't feel silly to call in like a spiritual guide or ask what things meant or to see things symbolically. But super interestingly, I kept with it for whatever reason. And when I would do it with my patients, especially clinically, if they were having a voice problem or they felt stuck in some way, when I was working clinically as a speech pathologist in voice disorders, I'd have them go on this journey down their throat. And sometimes in the throat, they would see massive boulders, or they'd see razor blades coming out, or they'd see a big dragon standing sort of at the foot of their tongue. And it became and they were just as surprised as I was. They were really shocked that their imaginations went there. So then it becomes sort of this question of, okay, well, what's going on with the dragon, and what's the dragon doing? Well, breathing fire. Okay. And so whether that was symbolizing symptoms that they were having in a way that we could then kind of play with or work with in this sort of more of a similar way to the way we would work with dream work, rather than just keeping everything very much physical and based on physiology, it gave me another tool to get at what was going on with the patient and sort of give them new tools to then, okay, well, if you've got a fire breathing dragon in your throat, what does the dragon want? How did it get there? Why is it breathing?
Yes, yes.
What's going on? So from that vantage point, we had sort of more tools to play. And then the other thing I think people underestimate for themselves is the power of using the singing voice for their own healing and for their own relaxation and meditation. And so I will, similar to the way that people might use a drum or a rattle for a consistent source or to get out of everyday consciousness, I use singing quite a bit. And sometimes I sing a song and sometimes I'm just singing vowels. But I, try to get other people to do it as well. And people who aren't trained singers are remarkably resistant to doing anything that is sound coming out of their mouths that isn't speaking. It just is shocking to me. But there are few things more accessible to every single human being and more healing for every human being than doing some sort of chanting or singing. And it's remarkable to me that people don't do it. So using the voice as its own image, as a meditative device, is a really, really powerful tool. And that is one of the things that I'll do with clients and patients as well, is just help them figure out, well, how do I use my own voice, which is always with me, and I don't have to do it on stage, I don't have to perform, I don't have to do it in front of or for anyone else. But rather than using a drum as an alternative to a drum, or when I'm sitting alone or I'm out in nature, I can use my voice as my meditation tool.
Yeah, there's a strong sense of groundedness because, like you said, your voice is always with you, no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely.
That concludes this episode of the Enough-ism Podcast. But first, here is our guided meditation from Soha.
In this guided visualization, you will visit your sacred temple. This is a place that you will return to often, perhaps daily, if not multiple times per day. Imagine that you are walking on a path, somewhere very old, perhaps even ancient, and yet familiar. You sense that you belong there, although you have no memory of having been there in this lifetime. Something is beckoning you, calling you home, although you have no idea where that is or what or who is calling you. Notice what you see. Is the path made of stone, dirt, or clay? Are you in the desert, or somewhere green and lush, or in a snowy tundra? Are you in a city, or is there nothing but a natural landscape all around you? You approach a locked gate, which looks so old and so abandoned, you imagine nobody has been there for centuries. But as you approach the gate, it's as if the gate itself comes alive to welcome you. You place your hands against the gate and magically, as if your sheer touch has unlocked time and memory, the gate opens to allow you passage and then closes and locks securely behind you. Inside of this gate, there is a vast courtyard, at the center of which is a temple. As you approach the steps of this temple, you know for certain that you have been here before, that in fact, in some other time and place, you served as priestess to this temple. What are you wearing as you approach the temple? What are you wearing on your feet? What are you wearing on your body? On your hands? On your head? Is your hair wrapped or flowing loosely? Do you have a headpiece, some sort of crown or a scarf on your head? Are you adorned in any way? As you climb the steps to this temple, embodied memory begins to come alive, and the feeling of pressing your feet into each sturdy step feels so familiar to you. You know in your whole being that you've done this same sacred climb thousands of times before. Your mind empties. Your heart fills with a sense of peace, humility, and belonging as you approach the entrance to the temple. What do you see? Are there doors to this temple, or is it open to the air? What materials is it made of? Straw, stone, wood? Is it light or dark? Gilded with gold or modest and simple? Is it a temple for one, or is it big enough to accommodate others as well? You remove your shoes and put on your sacred robes. Feel the weight of them, the texture, the cloth. You belong here. This is your sanctuary and also the place where you enact your sacred duty. You light the fire, the incense, the candles. You arrange the offering you have brought with you on the altar. Flowers, fruits, nuts, seeds, wine, crystals, whatever is appropriate for this particular deity. You find the temple's broom and you begin to sweep, clearing the floors of the accumulated dust and debris. You dust and mop and polish, grateful to be in service to the divine presence who inhabits this sanctuary. Finally, you kneel before this altar to offer reverence and to ask for comfort and guidance and support. Who is the sacred, benevolent being who inhabits this temple? Is it a goddess or a god, an angel or a spirit guide, an ancestor? Who is this being to whom you have dedicated your life of service, and who in turn guides and protects you, loves you without condition, offers you a depth of serenity and security, a breadth of knowledge and wisdom? Does this benevolent being have a name? A shape? A feeling? A texture? A color? A face? A voice? A language? Rest here in this sacred temple. Breathe in the scent of the incense. Feel the warmth of fire and candlelight all around you. Know that this is your home. This is exactly where you belong.